Nice.
Okay. Hey, welcome back to Teacher Talk with Paul and Jay. We are ready to go here tonight with book 4 of the Odyssey, all the way
Yeah.
up to book 4, the end of the so-called Telemachy. So we're glad that you are with us here, and we want to walk through this really important, kind of long book. It has a long tail sort of at the end, but we want to take you through it and talk about what's important, what stands out to us. Jay, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I just want to introduce people to Camille.
Camille.
She's on a lot of my YouTube videos, and I think she heard your voice, Paul, and she wants to make sure that all your citations are accurate.
That's her special job, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, all
Like
right.
all cats, like all cats, she's very good at least looking like she's judging us.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, welcome, Camille. And if you haven't met Camille in some of Jay's other videos, which we'll link to, he's got some great videos and other books. Both of us are posting other things, which we'll try to put links in down below so you can find them and find other things on literature and reviews that we are doing sort of separately as well. Jay, what about a poem? Do you have a poem prep for us for
yeah,
tonight?
one of my favorite contemporary poets, he actually just passed away, is a guy named Stephen Dunn. He
Hmm.
taught college in New Jersey. He was a basketball scholarship athlete in college. He writes a lot about a lot of things. But anyway, it strikes me that books 3 and 4 largely involve older men telling stories and giving advice to a young man. And I thought of
Hmm.
this poem. And his best collection, Stephen Dunn's best collection, is the book Different Hours. It won the Pulitzer Prize, I think, in '01. Oh my
Wow.
gosh, Paul. It's so up your alley. It's so good.
Really?
This,
I don't know him.
yeah,
I don't know him at all, Jay. I don't know this at
yeah.
all.
So I came upon him a handful of years ago. Anyway, this poem is called The Metaphysicians of South Jersey. And I know you and I have talked about this, and I was lucky enough to grow up with just a lot of like wise old people. And you
Yes.
just be a young person at their feet listening to their
Mm.
wisdom and stories and whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is called and it just, I think it's spiritually sort of connected to books 3 and 4 of the Odyssey. So
All right.
this is The Metaphysicians of South Jersey by Stephen Dunn. Because in large cities the famous truths already had been plumbed and debated, the metaphysicians of South Jersey lowered their gaze, just tried to be themselves. They'd gather at coffee shops in Vineland and deserted shacks deep in the pine barrens. Nothing they came up with mattered, so they were free to be eclectic and as odd as getting to the heart of things demanded. They walked, undisguised, on the boardwalk. At the Hamilton Mall, they blended with the bargain hunters and the feckless. Almost everything amazed them. The last hour of a county fair, blueberry fields covered with mist. They sought the approximate weight of sadness, its measure and coloration. But they liked a good ball game, too, well pitched, lots of zeros on the scoreboard. At night, when they lay down, exhausted and enthralled, their spouses knew it was too soon to ask any hard questions. Come breakfast, as always, the metaphysicians would begin to list the many small things they'd observed and thought, unable to stop talking about this place and what a world it was. Am I right, Paul? You got to check this guy out. He's so good.
Oh my gosh.
It's so good. I knew you'd like it.
That is amazing. That is
Yeah, right,
amazing.
right.
The odd the odd details, however odd it what they had to pay attention to the odd details, whatever it took to get to the heart
Yeah,
of things.
yeah.
What a
Oh,
perfect line.
I know, I know. So,
I'm picturing
folks listening, I can't recommend strong enough the collection "Different Hours" by Stephen Dunn. There's a poem I'm going to share later as we talk called "Odysseus's Secret" that's from that collection,
okay.
uh, and it's a meditation on the Odyssey by Stephen Dunn. So anyway,
Wow, he
uh,
mentions the Odyssey specifically.
oh yeah, oh
Uh,
yeah.
This is great. This is like that poem is like ennobling. I was picturing, like McDonald's anywhere in the country at 7 a.m. Right?
Yes.
It's packed with
Yeah.
old men from local town. Local
Yep.
town. This one
Yeah.
talking intensely about nothing's too small, no detail, and it's easy to look down at them and just say, "Oh, look at these guys over here just chatting." But what are they
Yep.
doing? Paying
Right.
close attention to the odd
Yeah.
details of life, however
Yeah.
however odd, however detailed, whatever
Yeah.
it takes to get to the truth or the heart of things, whatever it
Yeah.
demands.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and it's a great way of turning, of sort of flipping the script on the epic. We're going to meet a bunch of guys sitting around talking their stories, that they
Yep.
privilege, as the best and most meaningful stories. But it's their tales in their New Jersey, and they're
Yeah.
taking them seriously, and and
Right.
and that's the best we can do. That's what each of us should be doing to our
Yeah.
stories, is taking them seriously, taking them for
Right.
real. I always tell it to my students too. I'm like, that line or that whole concept of that teachers and some adults use, I think, shamefully, that, where they're always forecasting and talking about, when you get into the real world or later, when stuff matters, when you get to college, or when you're married, this,
Right.
no, 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 no. It's now.
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 Right.
Everything is now. When you're in college, it's now. When you're married, it's
Right.
now. And when you're in ninth grade and you're feeling and looking and reading and thinking, it's now. Take all of those things. None of them
Yep.
is more important than the other. Because if you treat
Right.
them that way, none of them will be important. You'll always be waiting for that day when it matters.
No,
Uh,
that's really good. And you and I are teaching teenagers now, and both of us, I'm sure, have many of them. And I don't want to betray confidences, but definitely what they're going through is the real world.
yeah.
Definitely. And not just teenage angst, but like very life or death things with family, mental health, just
Yes.
being a kid. You and I both have teenagers, being a kid in 2023 and transitioning to the Odyssey. I mean, something I didn't think about for today, but something that some of my students have been writing about. They're writing a paper this week on a question they have on books 5 to 8, so a little ahead of where you and I are right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
But a lot of them paid really close attention to how do adults talk to Telemachus, because they know how adults talk to them.
Hmm.
And like, I think we're in a book where you have the wealthiest sort of man in the known world who is,
Yeah.
was in the war and knew, I mean, a very highly sought after, high ranked, famous person, like the Elon Musk of the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Meeting this kid who just shows up. Like, how often do kids that we teach feel like they're treated respectfully by adults is part
Yeah.
of the heart of the first 4 books of this poem, I
Yeah,
believe.
and it's specifically talked about. It's not like you're importing a topic just to try to reach
No,
out to your kids. It's
no,
literally on the page. But this is
oh yeah,
before he talks to Nestor. He says, "I can't talk to this guy. I don't know how to talk to real live adults." And here in this chapter, Menelaus comments, on Telemachus's speech. Well spoken, young man. Like it's
yeah,
constantly on the page, and he treats him, Menelaus. I think, and we'll get into it, I guess, but treats him respectfully, seriously, takes his life serious, even though, by a certain perspective, you might say he has a right to condescend to him. What battles Telemachus
sure,
fought in?
sure.
What heroes has he stood toe to toe with?
Yeah, yeah,
What has he suffered? But Menelaus doesn't treat him that way, and it's crucially important to Telemachus's development. Here at the end of the section of the book that has his name on it, the Telemachy, the first 4 chapters,
yep,
where Odysseus really doesn't appear, where Odysseus
yeah,
isn't on the page, and
yeah,
and, and Odysseus appears in the next chapter. We'll meet him, and we won't hear from Telemachus again after the end of this book until almost 200 pages later. I counted it up until book 15. It's 11 books later, and then this plot boink picks right up where it
yep,
left off here at the end of this chapter.
yep,
11 books later. So it's a
yeah,
really interesting plotting and a really interesting move that happens. But again, here at the end, this interaction between Telemachus and the great Menelaus,
yeah,
it's amazing to be here, to be in his home, to meet his wife, the amazing
right,
Helen, the
yeah,
Helen. Yeah, we're here. We
yeah,
get to. It's like back in book 1, we said we get to hear Zeus talk. If you
Yep.
want, if you want to know about Greek religion, listen in book one. You meet the
Right.
gods. They're right there. Well, what about Helen, the famous face that launched 1,000 ships? In this
Right.
book, we get to
Yeah, there she
meet.
is.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I just want to say too, for people that are new to the Odyssey, maybe you're a student reading it first time or an adult going back to it, please be kind to yourself and patient to yourself with book four. It's the longest of the books, I believe. I
yeah,
know when I do this with my freshmen, I break it up into two parts.
yeah,
Um, it's Paul and I were talking before the podcast. It is it is really wacky. I mean, in a really amazing
yeah,
fantasy, sci-fi, adventure-y kind of way. So just relax. And Paul
yeah.
and we're gonna just quickly summarize it, not really cover everything, but just give you a sketch and then
Right,
chat about just some moments that stood out to us. But in terms
right.
of summary, I mean, I have like four just quick things. You mind if I just run
Yeah,
through the
do
quick
it, do it. If you can bring it down to 4 points, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, but any summary of any great book is insufficient. But anyway, just to anchor you a little bit. So at the end of book three, Telemachus and Nestor's son Pisistratus leave Sparta. I mean, they leave and land in Sparta, which is the next place Telemachus is slated to go
Right,
to, and that's ruled, as Paul said, by Menelaus, who fought with Odysseus. It's King Agamemnon's brother, the head of all the Greeks' brother,
right.
and it's his wife Helen whose abduction by the Trojans ended up leading to the Trojan War. So there's all kinds of interesting history, and there's even some debate among scholars as to whether Helen was abducted or left,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
which is
And,
interesting.
and
And
you
there's
did some of those edges in this book. You can sort of,
oh
if you have that in mind, you poke
yeah
around and listen to the lines, you
yeah
see
yeah
it's a real issue. Yeah,
yeah. So early on, I think you walk into this landscape, and we're just pounded over the head with the fact that Menelaus is the wealthiest man in the known world. So he's the wealthiest man in the known world. He's married to the most beautiful woman, mortal woman in the known world. That's his circumstance.
yeah,
Telemachus hears stories about his father, weeps, and
mm,
Helen, it's the first instance of the poem of self medication. It's not the last instance. Helen gives drugged wine, which translations say in different ways, removes the capacity for grief.
yeah,
Separate conversation, but it's a lot of ink is being spilled right now on that line.
yeah,
A key part of Xenia is you let your host sleep the night. So there's that trust that you feed them, you bathe them, and you let them sleep the night. So the guests
yes,
sleep. Menelaus found, and then Menelaus tells Telemachus of Menelaus's own Odyssey home, Odysseus, his own Odyssey on the way home to Sparta, which euphemistically includes like I acquired wealth in Egypt, which is to say raping and pillaging. It isn't like investing. You know what I mean? He's not investing in you know uh, you know,
right.
stocks. He's raping
Silicon
and
Valley
pillaging.
Bank or something like that.
No. And then secondly, he has again the whole point of books three and four is fact finding about Odysseus. He gets nothing in book three. Here we are. We're halfway through book four. Telemachus has to be thinking, what the heck am I doing here? Menelaus says, I met Proteus, the
Yeah,
shape shifting sea god, who, and this is, I make sure we look at this before the kids read it, only because it's wicked easy to get lost here. Proteus is, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but he's basically held down by Menelaus
yeah,
and he's changing into all these shapes. It's bananas. It's crazy. But he's the one, because he's sort of a god of the sea, knows that Odysseus is with Calypso. So
right.
that's where Telemachus hears that his dad's alive. This is a play within a play, by the way. This is like various scenes in Shakespeare. It's a play within a play. We are watching Menelaus
Hmm.
sort of narrating this moving story to Telemachus. There's like a layered thing happening. The
Right.
chapter ends with this weird abrupt shift back to Ithaca, with Penelope being sad and the suitors lying in ambush waiting for Telemachus. This is just a
Mhm.
rough sketch, but we have the
Yeah.
wealthiest man in the world, the most beautiful man in the world, Menelaus telling stories of his past that make him weep. We have Egypt, we have shape shifting gods, we have suitors they're ready to kill. And that's just like a very rough sketch.
It's true.
So
Like if you
it's
strip
crazy.
out, and it takes a ton of work to do it. I mean, you got to read through it several times and talk about getting lost. It really is like trying to sail back home from Troy.
Yeah.
You're gonna get shipwrecked about 20 times doing it. But in the end, it is. I think Jay, your summary is good. In the end, it is Peisistratus and Telemachus journey on across land this time, not in the boat. From Pylos to Sparta, they meet. They meet Menelaus with the purpose of finding out the original journey. I mean, the original goal, which Telemachus stated back in Ithaca when he left. I'll find out if my dad, if there's some word of him coming home. If we hear word, we'll come back. We'll give him a year. And if he doesn't show up, we'll hold a funeral. We'll move on. If we find out that he's dead, we'll go ahead and hold a funeral now and move on. So that mission is still there. And in this, as you say, so simply, he goes and meets Menelaus, who's in a position to know. Menelaus tells him, I found out, I heard from this weird story, which we'll dig into, that your father is still alive and weeping on an island. And that's kind of it, really. Like that's the important thing. Then, scene change, back in Ithaca at this very moment, as Jay was saying, there's drama going on. And so the setup when we leave Telemachus is that he's in big trouble and he doesn't know it. The big trouble is the suitors they've got sharpshooters up in the trees ready to assassinate him when he makes his way back home. And Penelope finds out. When we last knew, Penelope had not heard. She didn't know that Telemachus had left. Eurycleia kept the secret. And now she knows, and she's super sad. Okay, that's simple. You think, wow, that's the longest book, in the Odyssey. I could write that in 4 pages. But what is interesting here is all the other things, and there's a ton. So getting to that, and I think getting your students through this, and maybe trying to keep them from having that sort of mindset of just, let's Google the chapter and find out what it's about, but wandering around through it, finding out what Homer thinks is important for us to know, and asking questions why, and then kind of luxuriating in it, really, and just let yourself be. I'm mystified. There's several things in here that are on my list of those things I still haven't looked up, and I don't want to. I don't want to know what the scholars think. I still want to live with it and try to make sense of it from my deepening understanding of the characters involved. And there's a couple of those things in this chapter for me.
Yeah, and this is one of those, if you're teaching or if you're a student leading a class or just reading it in a reading group, any chapter this is true for, but the reader response approach works with really great books because it almost doesn't matter what a kid notices. So if you have a class of 20 people and you ask or a reading group with X number of people, and you ask what passage stands out to you the most for whatever reason, and you list them somewhere, you're going to get a really interesting tour. And what stands out to one person, which might be like stories of a father that a kid has never met, and that might stand out to you for some reason, and the other person might be dealing with more supernatural. It almost doesn't matter. There's so much going on here that I don't think anybody should feel obligated to sort of dig into every moment. It's what you're saying. Yeah. Enjoy the adventure of it.
Yes. It's not like a murder mystery where it's carefully laid out and you have to pay attention to the right details or you won't figure it out. You're right, Jay. This is not that sort of book. The plot part you can get. I mean, there are details that we just went over and you can find those. The rest of it, though, is just color and background and fullness. That makes this more and more interesting, makes these people more and more compelling. All right, so how do you want to break into the weirdness? This is the weirdest book. This is the weirdest book.
Yeah, I love it. We were talking about it, Why don't you, because I did a bunch of talking, do you want to start with your essential quotation and talk a bit, and then I'll do mine?
Yeah, sure. The essential quote, you know what? I say sure, but I don't know that I really have a. I don't know if I have the essential an essential quote from this for me. I mean, I think I would have to go to if I'm pushed on that. I would have to say you have to go all the way through the chapter to maybe one of two scenes. I'll do one, and that is really where Menelaus reveals to Telemachus what he's found out about his father. So that's about 3/4 of the way in. It's after this extremely weird scene where the old man of the sea, Proteus's daughter, tells Menelaus, for whatever reason, how to capture his father, her father,
Yeah.
this Proteus character, and find out whatever he wants to find out from him. So they go through this whole ordeal, which I'll just skip. And he compels Proteus to talk to him. And he asks Proteus essentially two questions. One, how do I get home? How do I get out of here? Because they're stuck. There's no wind. They're in the doldrums. They need to get out.
Yeah.
What god did I offend? And how can I fix that? Proteus tells him. While he's got him, while you've got a prophet on the hook, like spewing details, go ahead and ask some more questions. So Menelaus asks him, when we split up back at Troy to head back home, I know Nestor and I, made it this far. Nestor probably made it home, but of the other people, who made it home? Who didn't? And Proteus says, well, lots of people made it home, but of the admiralty, of the captains, there's a couple who died. He wants to tell him about, and the drama here is that one of the people who died is Menelaus's brother. And then we're back to the story of Agamemnon's death again, and of Orestes and the revenge and the whole thing. It just right. It's back on the page again. In this case, so that's a thread of continuity in this weirdness. We get a little more details about how Agamemnon died exactly. Yep. And there was an ambush, and there were people watching and waiting for him. And it echoes this thing that we're about to find out, which is that Telemachus is going to be entered into the same story. There's going to be an ambush waiting for him. And so one of the things that this does is build drama and build tension. Because when Telemachus goes back home, when Odysseus finally goes back home, they stand the chance of, and you're reminded this over and over, they stand the chance of suffering the same fate that Agamemnon does. If they're not, and you have to fill in the blank, if they're not pious enough, if they're not careful enough, if they're not all of these things. So there's real risk. And you see it because Agamemnon's the king of all the kings, and he dies horribly. It's awful. So Proteus tells Menelaus this about his brother. Menelaus is angry and upset and despondent. But then he tells him, he says, well, is there anyone else? Who you said? Well, Proteus says there's three guys I can tell you about. And so Menelaus says, well, who's the third guy? And this third guy is Odysseus. So through all this drama, Telemachus hears that, not directly, but very indirectly, that his father is still alive. So Menelaus says, the old man of the sea, this guy who can tell you things, who knows things, whose daughter is the knowing goddess, told me that Odysseus is not dead, but that he's shipwrecked, and he's on shore weeping, wishing he was getting home this whole time. Yeah. So that's got to be the essential thing, I guess, because that's what Telemachus is here for. If you're trying to stick to the plot, that's what Telemachus is here for, and he gets his information.
Yeah, that's good. Mine is a Menelaus Telemachus moment as well, and it's early in the chapter. So this is in the Emily Wilson. It's line 78, and Menelaus says, let's see, no mortal, my dear boys, can rival Zeus. His halls and home and property are deathless. Now, this is the wealthiest man in the world saying,
right.
Elon Musk saying, no, God is greater than I am. And that's an important moral point. Remember, Telemachus is told to be a man in book 1 and has no exemplars. Well, here's one. You could argue. Some man may match my wealth, or maybe not. I suffered for it. I was lost, adrift at sea for 8 long years. I traipsed through Cyprus, Phoenicia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Sidon, and Araby. This is important. It's sort of like those lists in the Bible that you could sleep through, but if you poke around and research all those names, they're all kind of interesting, right?
Yeah.
This is a little Google Earth tour. He doesn't go to 2 towns over. He's all over the known world, right? Where lambs are born with horns. Their master and his slave have milk. Okay, skip a sentence. While I wandered there, accumulating wealth, again, not investing, probably violently taking what he wanted to.
Accumulating wealth,
which was expected if you were victorious in war. On your way home, you would just take whatever you want. That was expectation. That wasn't weird.
Right.
Someone crept in and killed my brother. Again, here we go. Just this again. His own scheming wife betrayed him. I can take no joy in all my wealth. Okay, here's some really important points.
Mm.
Whoever they may be, your fathers have surely told you how much I've suffered. I've lost my lovely home and I was parted for many years from all my splendid riches. Now, here's one of the weirdest things said in the book, and this is as a married person, don't do this. I wish I had stayed here with just a third of all the treasure I've now acquired. If those who died at Troy, so far away from Argive pastures, were alive and well.
Mm.
The woman he went to rescue was sitting probably a foot to his left. Now, he effectively just said, I wish I left her with the enemy so that all my comrades were still alive. Now, there's a hierarchy of relationship that's asserted there, that the life of my comrades somehow trumps me being with my wife. That's literally what he literally just said that, at least in the form of pain.
Jay, that's
Married
such a cruel reading.
That's what he said. That is what he said.
I never thought of that. I never thought of that.
Here we go. But here we go.
I was so taken with the passion of, his loyalty
Sure.
to his friends. But yeah, Helen's like, hello.
Right. You did go to save me. So, and then this really great point. Sometimes tears bring comfort to my heart, but not for long. Cold grief grows sickening. I miss them all, but one man most. Here we go.
Yeah.
When I remember him, I cannot eat or sleep, since no one labored like him. Odysseus. Now, we don't get Telemachus's face there, but you got to stage this right in your head, make a movie in your head. Oh my gosh, here we go. And then the wealthiest man in the world, who you'd think on paper would be happy as hell all the time, says, Odysseus's destiny was suffering. Remember, Odysseus's name means man of pain. His destiny was suffering, and mine, the endless pain of missing him. We don't even know if he's still alive. He's been gone so long. And then Telemachus weeps at hearing this news. I just think there's a lot said about Odysseus here. And I think more globally, one of the interesting points here is that war trauma and losing men who you've served with in war is a particular set of feelings that in this poem seem to transcend all other feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Oh, and the pathos is amazing. I mean, I marked it in the margin here, weeping. Yep. These Menelaus, he's a killer. He's a man killer. And a leader of killers of men.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're crying. And Telemachus. We saw Telemachus cry before, but it was out of frustration and anger. But this is out of feeling for his father, who he's never met.
Right.
And his feeling for. It's great. Yeah. It's a great scene. And I bring this up with my students. I say, if you know action hero movies, it's pretty tough to come up with an example, like a John Wick, sort of character, or Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible. These guys are not sitting around crying, like they lose all their comrades. They're all shot and, and they just celebrate the win in the end. And all those guys who, at the beginning of the movie, they were really close to, they don't even remember them anymore. They're just gone, whatever. They're just thrown characters. But, these guys are heroes, and they're way more realistic because a real person with real friends feels this way, actually. Yeah, although, as I was thinking of it in the Rambo 1 movie, Rambo does break down and cry toward the end of it.
First Blood.
Yeah, First Blood Part 1, and it's a really good movie, and he's in tears, absolute tears. So it's a great feature. Yeah. Yeah,
no, I think you're right. I don't want to go too long on this, but I think the best writer, according to our friend Bill Britton, who's a Marine Vietnam veteran who teaches a history class at our school, he said the greatest writer of imaginative literature of the Vietnam era is Tim O'Brien. And Tim O'Brien has a piece called How to Tell a True War Story. And it's basically cautioning people to try to extract simplistic morals. And the other thing that Bill says, and that a lot of really great readers of Homer have said over and over, is the Iliad and the Odyssey are not pro-war poems, and they're not anti-war poems. They're war poems. In other words, you're going to get decapitations, you're going to get killing, murder, loss, but you know what else you're going to get? Broken older men. You're going to get that too. You're going to get also the family left at home. You're going to get ghosts. You're going to get there is no stone left unturned to this story.
Yes. That's exactly right. And they're torn over it. Like it is just the experience of life. Yes, yes, Menelaus made a fortune, so he's got wealth. Well,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Well, that's
Nothing.
complicated. Yeah, that's complicated
Yeah.
because he says, "I'd like to have my friends back. Is what I'd like to
Yeah.
have." That's what I want. Maybe he would say, though he doesn't say it, I'd rather not have lost my wife, ever, at
Yeah.
all. Possibly, but that's a whole other weird thing in this chapter for me. But you're
Yeah.
right; that complexity is worth poring over and reading and trying to hear and hear and hear and hear again. It's way deeper than the cheap, sort of drive-by readings, of wealth or of being a warrior or of being great or something. This is
Yeah.
all those things together, and that loss of time and of being away from home, as you mentioned, is commemorated in almost the most pathetic ways possible. As this book
Yeah.
goes along. Yeah, that's
And,
good.
and we're Telemachus. I mean, we're learning the moral landscape of the wider world.
Yeah,
Well, what's Telemachus doing? He's lived in a little town his whole life, hasn't done anything. He's learning about the wider landscape, moral landscape of the wider world. He's learning
yes,
all the things we're talking about, he's wrestling with for the very first time. What
yes,
it's like being an adult, what it's like being an adult in pain, what it's
yeah.
like, how valuable are the things that the world values? Not very.
Mm.
Like he's learning all these things for the first time,
Yeah, and
you
it's
know?
back to that comment you made earlier of having wise people in your life. It's almost like an uncle, kind of a avuncular relationship. He's developing here right on the spot with people who can teach him like no one else can. And you're
Yeah.
right. What he's hearing about what it means to be an adult and be in the world is complex, deep, and rich. And he
Yeah.
and he takes it in. He takes it in. I
Yeah.
think the fact that he cries over because he has some snarky lines, which we pointed out earlier in the book. I don't know
Yeah.
if Odysseus is my dad, but he feels his loss. That comes from Menelaus
Yeah.
because Telemachus never knew him, never
Yep.
knew him. Um,
So what do you have for a surprising? Paul and I usually do an essential sort of moment and then something that was sort of surprising to us. God, the whole thing is surprising, but
oh, there's so much weirdness in it. So I'd like to go to the scene where Helen is talking. So we meet,
yeah.
the
Oh, good. I'm glad
gorgeous.
you're talking about that.
Yeah, the gorgeous Helen, who calls herself a wanton, sort of played fast and loose and toyed with, flirting with this other guy and setting the world on fire, their world on fire, and she almost sort of laughs at it. Um, and it's interesting that talk about just what's said in proximity to a spouse, what Helen, the details she goes into in
Yeah.
proximity to Menelaus in front of Telemachus is is sort of funny, and Menelaus just he doesn't even comment on it really. The fact that she has this affair and left him for a time, and then ends up coming back. But for me, here's maybe the weirdest part of all of that, and that is, and this is the thing I really don't. This is the thing I really don't understand, which is Helen tells these stories. She says while she was in Troy, and this is nice too because we get a
Yep.
behind the scenes picture in
Yeah.
Troy, and she talks about Odysseus as well. So it's more info for Telemachus about his dad. And so she talks about running into Odysseus behind the walls of Troy when Odysseus had snuck in once. And but the thing that she says that's really surprising has to do with the time. Do you remember the scene? And I'm not finding the page all of a sudden where they're in the horse. So
Yeah. In the
so
Emily Wilson, it's around line 250-ish.
around line
Oh,
250.
uh, oh no, yeah, it's right around 290. Three times you went around. This is Menelaus says, at least in this translation. The line numbers are different in yours, but three times you went around the hollow belly, touching the hiding place and calling on us Greeks by name. You put on different voices for each man's wife.
Yes, yeah,
Uh,
that's the one.
Menelaus, like in front of everyone, is calling out his wife for trying to get the Greeks, her people, in trouble while in Troy.
Yes. Why did she do that, Jay? Why did she do that? Why did she try to upend? So she says, I was done. I realized I shouldn't have done what I did. I was done with Paris. I had my time with him. That was over. She had met up with Odysseus. She didn't give him away when he snuck
Right,
into the city of Troy. She recognized him and talked with him, but
right,
didn't try to turn him in. She's clearly remaining loyal. So it kind of reminds me of Odysseus, who has affairs while he's gone, sleeps with the goddess, but in his heart he always wants to be back home. It's sort of that kind of thing where Helen is obviously having an affair, but in her heart she's
right.
still loyal. Um, but she goes around the horse, yeah, and is calling out, imitating the voices of these men's wives, trying to get them to show themselves, to call out, and then
Yeah,
ruin the whole ruse. I don't I
right.
don't know why that's there. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, not deeply. What you just said was interesting. How you said it was interesting, which is she's as disloyal, you could argue, to her husband as Odysseus was.
Yeah,
But a lot of people consider Odysseus to be a hero, and no one considers, I mean, a lot of people consider Helen to be immoral. Um,
yeah,
so, I mean, there's a pretty obvious double standard. It's a 3,000-year-old thing. But
yeah,
it says in the Emily Wilson this very blunt sentence. Menelaus says, "We're all in the belly of the horse. All of us are responding to our wives' voices because we haven't seen them in a decade and we're dying to embrace them," right? Simply put, Odysseus prevented us from going.
yeah,
Odysseus Odysseus came up, this is probably important to Telemachus. Like, he came up with the stratagem of the horse, but equally importantly is he kept all the men quiet when, if any of them made noise, the whole thing would have fallen apart and there'd be no Odyssey, they'd all be dead.
yes, yes. And that might be the point of the tale in this, is that, yeah, in the Fitzgerald translation, which I finally found at line 310, desire moved his throats to hail you, but Odysseus' great hands clamped over his jaws and held. So he saved us all till Pallas Athena led you away at last.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like the as you say, there's I guess double standards. I don't know. I hold off a little and retreat into roles. Like, they're just different roles that are played. And the
Right.
one thing I'd like to emphasize about that is that there is no judgment in this. So you say, okay, Helen has an affair and she's seen as, I mean, she causes the war, but there's not, unless I'm wrong, there's not a line of condemnation of her from Menelaus. Menelaus never says, "Oh, and you should never have done that," and "Oh, what
Right.
a, you know, how awful you were to do what you did," and "Yeah, you
Yeah.
finally saw the light," or something. There's nothing like that. Everything is just taken as a matter of fact. This is what
Right.
happened.
And I
Stuff
want to put
happened.
out there, I want to put out there too, really important thing when reading old text. I would argue any text, but
Mm,
we talked about this with Romeo and Juliet too. It isn't any different. The idea of marrying for love is a very recent invention. Think
yeah.
of how lucky Paul's wife and my wife are. No, the idea of marrying for love is a very recent invention. So the
Yeah.
whole idea of, like, we probably would want to imagine that Helen really loved Menelaus and then was kidnapped and is desperate to go back. She was probably just, there was probably a business deal between two fathers. She was probably a middle schooler and she was married to a guy. And then for 10 years, she's with somebody else. Maybe she's happier there. Maybe she
Yeah.
never thought she'd go back. Who the heck knows? And one
Right.
of the peculiar things, and we're going to get to this in book 6, I think, is that, or 7, is it might be the case that the one marriage that's like a modern marriage is
Mhm.
Odysseus's and Penelope's.
Mm. Hmm.
But other than that, like, I think it's always dangerous to impose 21st century ethics onto any text that's not in the 21st century. So I think
Thank you.
our job early on is to figure out what are the moral rules of the book. And then
Yes.
it's a lot more dynamic a read. And I
Yes.
think what you're pointing out is it's really complicated. This isn't Leave It to Beaver with togas. This is
No.
complicated.
Leave it to Beaver. No,
You
it is
know?
not. Oh, and don't forget, when we first arrive here in Sparta, there's a double wedding going on. And the son who's getting married, who's his mom? A
Yeah, it's
slave girl. A
yeah,
slave
it's
girl from the Trojan War. It is not Helen. It's
Right.
Helen's daughter, Helen's blood daughter that's getting married, but the son
Right.
is Menelaus's blood son,
Yep.
but not with Helen. And it's just a given. It's just happening. It's
Yeah.
just a thing that
Right.
happens. But I think you're completely right. Um, that when you dig into a text, you should find out the moral universe that you're in and be open to finding that out. Now, that doesn't mean you're not required to withhold judgment on it.
Oh,
I
sure.
actually think
Yeah.
the opposite. But
Yeah.
those are two different things. One, finding out what you think about that moral universe is one thing, but what is it? That's the first question, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not what you think of it, but what is it actually, and then develop, a
Yeah. Yeah.
perspective on it. So yeah, I want to, it's so easy to impose our own time and own brilliant judgments, especially if your judgments are as brilliant as ours are. So,
Oh, did I laugh
to
too quick?
withhold that and hold back and try to figure out what's going on, it's worth doing.
Yeah. No, and it also sidebar, it makes reading interesting, and it makes the act of reading imaginative literature more than autobiography over and over again. Like I have no interest in just looking for my own opinions over and over again. Like I want my world to be wider and bigger. Some
Yes.
of that's some of that's going to bother me. Some of it's going to enrich and enlighten me, and all
Yeah.
that's fine. You know.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Speaking of this, my surprising moment is a Euroclea moment.
I was just going to
Um,
ask you that. Okay, lay
yeah,
it on us.
Euroclea is really interesting because at the end of book 4, Penelope's really upset that
Right.
her kid is gone, and she finds out that the slave, the maid,
Yeah.
the nurse, Euroclea, knew it, like because Telemachus needed some adult help, not unlike the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So this is 742 in the Wilson. Then the loyal. It's a short passage. Penelope goes after her and
Hmm.
says a bunch of things, and then Euroclea says, "Lady," to Penelope, "sweetheart, even if you take a sword and kill me, I will tell the truth." Now, I say to my students before this class starts, I just put that quote on the board and say, "Who do you think's going to say that?" And no one says Euroclea. That sounds like a heroic, manly sentiment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
before we look at a book like this, and I would argue any great book, but before we look at a book like this as merely antiquated or quaint or morally sort of vacant or whatever,
Right.
here you have an utterly powerless person, so powerless she's literal property. She's a literal thing, albeit given pretty good status by Odysseus's dad when he purchased her. But still, she's
Right.
a thing. They could get rid of her like you and I take out the trash if they want to. And then she goes, "I knew all this. I gave him what he asked for, Telemachus, bread and sweet
Mm.
wine. He made me swear an oath not to inform you till 12 days had passed." And then she basically says, "Go have a bath." She like tells her what to do. Um, Euroclea not only stands up to royalty, but basically says the greatest good in my life is keeping my oath and telling the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even pieces of property, women
Yeah.
and men here, have a moral framework, have
Mm.
passion, have loyalty, have oaths that they have to keep, truths that they have to maintain. So
Yeah.
I just think that makes the world of the Odyssey incredibly interesting and dynamic and perpetually surprising when you have no idea who's going to be interesting at any moment. I think that's really, really interesting.
Oh, it's great. And also the complexity of her being a slave in their household. Clearly, she's deeply integrated into this family, deeply
Yeah,
integrated into this family. And she's able to say something as strong as the line you gave. The Fitzgerald translation says, "Have my throat cut without mercy," or whatever you will. I'm going
yep,
to tell the truth. Wow.
yep,
Okay. This is not like some bowing, subservient person. And then she
right,
gives Penelope really good advice. All right.
yeah,
She says, "Look, Athena, Zeus's daughter, she will be who saves this boy from death. Um, so spare the old man, and then spare the old man this further son." Because Penelope says, "Oh, go up." She sends her to go tell Laertes, Odysseus's dad, what's going on, get him to help. Maybe he'll do something, stage a, revolt, and yeah, Euroclea says, "No, no, 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 don't do that. Leave the old man alone. Athena's going to take care of your son." Um,
yep.
so she
Yeah,
has she has
Good.
a lot of power, a lot of moral weight, in this story.
And who else in the poem? I'm just maybe someone can comment on this. Is there anyone else in the poem so far or at any point willing to sacrifice their life for an oath or for just the truth?
Mm. Mm.
Not for like I'm going to war or like, but just for an idea. Like
Yeah,
it's peculiar. It really
yeah.
is.
It is, and it's not the last time she's going to do this either. This,
Right.
if you just follow her thread, extract her out and follow her
Yeah.
thread, this develops in a very, very important way, and it's a piece
Yeah.
of her character. It's a great, yeah,
Right.
but you're right. It's a great thing. It's like pointing out, as we did in Hamlet, how the gravedigger, might be
Yeah.
the only wit and intellect, that matches Hamlet in the play.
Yeah.
He's at least extremely distinctive. And
Right.
and this is that corner of the story. Eurycleia, she's not Agamemnon's brother. She's not Helen. She's probably
Yeah.
ugly. But she's unbelievably memorable and important to the story. And she soothes Penelope. Penelope's back asleep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's so many of these things. I mean, after this, the phantom, the ghost that appears that slips in through the door latch.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know how Wilson translated, but the Fitzgerald's amazing. It's Penelope's sister, and then they have a conversation. You
Yeah.
know, it's fantastic, and her sister in phantom form soothes Penelope's mind. I'm sure there's a great Freudian reading of that, no doubt,
Right.
and that's enormously weird. I really like that though. It's great color. It's great storytelling. I think
Yep.
very interesting plotting, which if you've ever tried to write fiction on your own, which I have, and still do, but you just can't come up with stuff. I can't. It's so interesting
Yeah.
and plotting so
But it's
hard.
almost Paul, it's almost I'm sorry to interrupt. It's almost as if the kind of pain these characters are experiencing require unexpected, wild connections,
Mm,
like phantoms and seagull. Like I don't think straight ahead descriptions of feeling loss work here.
yeah,
You know, the kind
mm,
of pain and loss that's being felt. It's like, why do we use figurative language? Because sometimes the only way to describe something well is to say, well, this is like this other thing. Like
that's right.
describing it in itself just doesn't cover it. This is like an
That's,
extreme version of that,
yes, yes.
you know?
Which is deeply at the heart of the meaning of stories like this, is that
Yeah,
things that are the most complicated, maybe the most important, simply cannot be communicated straightforwardly. It can't be
yeah,
done. You can't say it. You can only say it by not saying it in some
right.
creative, associative, deep way. And that's
Yep.
and that's what's going on here.
So what do you
Um,
have for a lingering question? I mean, there's so many at the end of book four. As you said, we end book four. This is Telemachus's initial narrative, right? Book five coming up is a series of books really focusing on the hero of the poem. So what lingering questions do you have at this point?
Well, the thing I would like to track that I don't know if I've ever formally done this, but if you think of this as the place that we're leaving Telemachus, and if you're reading the Telemachy, these first four books, as a development of Telemachus from this boy who's slumped in the corner. I picture him slumped in the corner with a Game Boy, like idling the hours away
Yeah,
and and it's just beat. I just picture the suitors coming in and thumping him on the head every single day of his life. Sit over there, boy. To him getting up enough courage to confront them and make a speech, but then loses it and cries, and falls apart. If we're beginning there and then we're ending off here at the end of book four, and we're not going to hear from him again, we're not going to see him again for 11 books, 200, almost 200 pages of the story. Where exactly have we left him? What has he come to? And we've talked
mm,
through some of these things that he's experienced, that has shown in front of it, or that he has been shown, that he's been able to see and hear from great people like Nestor and Menelaus and Helen. Um, but what exactly is the status, and how do we know? I think I'd like to look for that when we see him again, when we see him in action again, back on Ithaca, and ask that question: again in about 11 books. Where exactly is he now? Now that he's there and back again, Hobbit
Yeah.
style, he comes back to the Shire, as it were, but he's not the same little Hobbit, when he gets there.
Right. Right.
So maybe
Yeah.
that's my lingering sort of,
I like
character
that.
development question.
Mine's related, I think, Paul.
Hmm.
Just considering Telemachus's quest, Helen's sort of restlessness, Menelaus's profound sense of loss, Penelope's sadness. You know what all these people have in common is that they're connected to Odysseus, and that
Hmm.
Odysseus is a strong character. And I think we're being set up. Telemachus primarily is being set up, but we as readers who are like Telemachus, it's very method reading early on.
Hmm.
Um, I I think we're being encouraged, that polytropos idea early on. I think
Yeah.
that has both ennobling heroic elements and very dark elements. That this man is going to be fascinating and brilliant and heroic and damaged and deceptive and the most famous liar in the history of literature, and
Yeah.
also someone you want to emulate in other ways. Like, I think Telemachus and us are being set up to sort of buckle up for whenever we're going to meet him, because
Yeah.
none of it is going to be obvious. It's
Yeah.
not going to be a set of like cliche statements about a warrior. Like, it isn't going to be that, and we're going to see that immediately in book 5. That, all right, we know this is about a military hero returning home. Nothing in book 5 is what you expect. Nothing.
That's a great teaser for book 5.
Yeah,
Um,
keep reading.
yes, keep reading.
And make
So,
sure you all comment. Make sure you all comment on this. We want to,
yeah,
we want to hear your thoughts, alternate views. Paul and I are not ever going to claim that these are definitive statements. We're two people who just love this book, and we're talking about
yes, yes,
it. Yeah,
and it would be great to hear from other readers of this. That is the whole point of Teacher Talk. We hope to do this in person someday, and in many conferences with others, perhaps of you who are listening now, who we can dig in with, around a table, like it might have been done at Menelaus' house, with
yeah,
food and drink,
yeah,
and real insight from people who've spent time wrestling with this stuff. So throw some things in the comments. That would be great. Maybe what your favorite weird thing is from this chapter. But all in
yeah,
all, as Jay said, stick with it. Don't let a long meandering chapter like this put you off. It's strong and good, and you can find the main thread if that's all you're interested in, which is great. And then you're ready to move into book 5, and the story just takes off. Just takes
yeah,
off from there. So,
yeah. Hey, that
well,
was good, Paul. Thank you very much for
yeah,
checking in. Uh, I
yeah.
thought,
Thank
I
you.
know this is a long episode, folks, but I mean, this is a long book. Paul and I actually didn't address lots of things. So, like Paul said, definitely comment in the comment section.
Yeah, that'd be great. And thanks, Jay, for that Stephen Dunn poem. That was fantastic. I look forward
Oh,
to
you're welcome.
checking him out a little more. So,
Yeah.
all
All
right,
right.
Jay. Hey, thanks.
Hey,
We'll see you
thanks.
next time.
Thank you, Paul.